Margaret Wallace had always been the kind of woman people admired from afar. Strong, sharp, and sophisticated, she built her business from scratch in the charming coastal town of Savannah, Georgia. For decades, she was a fixture in the business world, a name that carried weight in real estate circles across the Southeast. But on a quiet Monday evening, just 48 hours after marrying a man nearly half her age, Margaret collapsed during dinner and never regained consciousness. At first glance, it looked like a tragic but natural ending to a long, hard-working life. The official cause? A heart attack. Given her known history of heart disease, no one questioned it, except one person. Her daughter, Detective Alana Wallace, stood outside the emergency room with clenched fists and a frozen expression. Something didn't sit right. Not the timing, not the look in the new husband's eyes, and certainly not the convenient nature of it all. What kind of man marries a woman on Saturday and becomes a widower by Monday? Margaret had always been cautious, especially in matters of the heart. After her divorce 15 years ago, she had vowed never to get entangled again. She had love once, family always, and a successful career that gave her purpose. But now she was 60, retired, wealthy, and alone in a house too large for one person. The man she married, Damian Carter, was everything her daughter feared. 30 years younger, with a smile too smooth and a past too vague. But to Margaret, he was charming, kind. He made her feel seen again. And in those final weeks, she let herself believe she had found something real. But Detective Alana Wallace had made a career out of noticing what others missed. And when the call came, "Your mother's had a heart attack," she knew immediately. This was no ordinary loss. Her instincts, honed by a decade in homicide, screamed something darker. Margaret had been healthy, relatively speaking. Yes, she took medication for her heart, but she was diligent about it. Disciplined. She kept her pills in a color-coded organizer and followed every instruction to the letter. She didn't drink. She walked every morning. She even brought her medication list to every checkup. For her to suddenly collapse 2 days into her honeymoon? No, that wasn't Margaret. But Damian's performance was flawless. He cried. He made all the right calls. He told the nurses how much he loved her, how much it hurt. He held her hand at the hospital, whispered promises, and signed the forms to authorize cremation. He played the grieving husband like a seasoned actor. And maybe that's because he'd done it before. What the doctors didn't know, and what Margaret never found out, was that Damian had a pattern. A past filled with aliases and ashes. 4 other women in 4 other cities. Wealthy, older, lonely. Each one wooed, married, then buried. Each time, Damian walked away richer and cleaner than before. Margaret Wallace was the 5th. But he hadn't counted on her daughter being a detective. He hadn't counted on someone noticing the way he moved through grief like a man, rehearsing lines. He hadn't counted on a woman like Alana, trained, skeptical, and furious. In those first 48 hours after her mother's death, Alana didn't cry. She listened. She watched. She took mental notes. Why did he insist on cremation so quickly? Why did he say she just collapsed when there were no witnesses? Why did he know where her medication was? And why was the pill organizer missing from her nightstand? Margaret's death wasn't just personal now. It was a case. And Alana Wallace wasn't just mourning her mother. She was hunting her killer. Before Damian Carter ever stepped foot into her life, Margaret Wallace had mastered the art of being alone. After decades of running her real estate empire in Savannah, she retired with an 8-figure portfolio and a reputation for being one of the smartest women in the industry. She was elegant, well-spoken, and respected. But she was also, in the quiet corners of her life, deeply and painfully alone. Her friends had slowly drifted. Some passed away. Others moved closer to their grandchildren. Her only daughter, Alana, had moved to Atlanta years ago to pursue her career in law enforcement. Margaret didn't blame her. If anything, she was proud. But the phone calls became fewer, and the silence in her spacious Victorian home grew louder. She filled her days with books, gardening, and charity galas. Nights were more difficult. There were only so many glasses of wine and reruns of Jeopardy! A person could enjoy alone. She never told anyone how much it stung during the holidays, when everyone else had someone to cook for, someone to come home to. She never said out loud how it felt to wake up on her 60th birthday to a beautifully made bed that no one else had slept in for over a decade. It wasn't that Margaret couldn't find a man. There had been suitors. Some were her age, some younger. But she didn't trust easily. And frankly, she had no patience for games. If a man couldn't match her wit or didn't understand her independence, she had no use for him. Besides, she wasn't interested in being someone's retirement plan. She'd worked too hard to be reduced to someone's nice old lady with money. But underneath all that resolve, there was still a longing for companionship, for someone who remembered to ask how her day was, for shared coffee in the mornings and soft conversation in the evenings, for laughter that filled the empty rooms. And that longing, quiet, buried beneath layers of pride and self-sufficiency, was exactly what Damien Carter sensed the moment he saw her. It was at a fundraiser for the Coastal Arts Foundation, something Margaret attended out of habit more than enthusiasm. She wore a navy pantsuit, pearls, and the kind of expression that said she'd rather be home. She stood near the wine table, chatting politely with acquaintances, but not really engaging. That's when he walked in. Damien was magnetic from the start. 30-something, tall, perfectly groomed. He wore a charcoal blazer and confidence like cologne. Not too flashy, not too casual. Just the right mix of approachable and mysterious. He didn't flirt, not at first. He simply struck up a conversation about the painting being auctioned. He made her laugh with a small, harmless joke. He mentioned that he'd just moved to Savannah from Charleston and was trying to get more involved in the community. That's all it took. Over the following weeks, they ran into each other again and again. At a jazz night downtown, at a gallery opening, at the local farmer's market. Each meeting felt coincidental, but nothing about Damien Carter ever was. He did his homework. He knew her schedule, her social circle, her routines. He studied the women like her, wealthy, widowed, or divorced, dignified yet craving connection. And he played the long game. He didn't rush. He didn't ask for dates. He offered friendship, a book recommendation, a dinner recipe, a conversation about politics that made her raise an eyebrow, then laugh. He made her feel seen. And for Margaret, who had been invisible for too long, that was intoxicating. She started looking forward to their chats. She smiled when she saw his name on her caller ID. She told herself she wasn't falling for him, but even she couldn't deny the small thrill of hearing his voice. Still, she kept her guard up. She was nobody's fool, but Damien was patient. He knew how to wait. He knew how to show just enough vulnerability to make her drop her defenses. He told her he was raised by his grandmother after his mother passed away, that he struggled financially for years and never quite felt like he belonged, that her confidence and elegance reminded him of the only woman who ever really loved him. It was a lie, all of it, but it worked. For the first time in years, Margaret Wallace felt chosen, not for her money, not for her accomplishments, but for who she was. And slowly, she let him in. If Margaret Wallace had seen what was behind Damien Carter's smile, she would have walked away the moment he said hello. But like so many others before her, she only saw what he wanted her to see. Damien Carter wasn't new to this. He was a man with a method, one he had honed with each new victim, each new city, each new name. Before Savannah, it was Charleston. Before Charleston, it was Birmingham. And before that, no one really knew, because Damien had erased who he used to be. What little was known about his past was stitched together from sealed records, closed cases, and distant whispers. Born as Marcus Delaney in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, he grew up in foster care, bounced from one home to the next. No family, no guidance. By the time he was 17, he had already served time in juvenile detention for fraud. But Marcus didn't want to be a criminal. He wanted to be invisible. So he changed his name, then his accent, then his story. By his mid-20s, he had learned that you didn't need a gun to rob someone. You just needed charm. He started small, a retired librarian in Mobile, a widowed nurse in Montgomery. He would offer kindness, companionship, and just the right amount of vulnerability. And once he gained their trust, he'd start laying the groundwork. A joint bank account here, a change in insurance beneficiaries there. Every step felt natural. Every decision seemed mutual, until they died. Sometimes it was an accident, sometimes an illness. Once it was a stroke that happened in the bathtub, but none of the deaths ever raised alarms. Why would they? These were older women with existing health problems. And Damien, always the doting husband or fiancé, was quick to mourn, quick to cooperate, and quicker to disappear. By the time questions arose, he was already gone. Now, in Savannah, he had found his most promising mark yet, Margaret Wallace. Wealthy, retired, alone, and craving something she didn't dare admit out loud: love. To Damien, it was almost too easy, but he didn't let that make him sloppy. He played it slow, careful, intentional. He started bringing her tea in the evenings. He'd show up with her favorite flowers, white camellias, the same kind her father used to plant. He listened when she spoke about her youth, her regrets, her daughter Alana. He remembered birthdays of people she mentioned only once. And all the while, he said nothing about money. That was part of the plan, because Damien understood the psychology of trust. He knew that the best way to get someone a hand over their fortune was to make them believe you didn't want it all. So when he casually suggested, one evening, that Margaret should think about simplifying her estate just in case anything ever happened, it didn't sound like manipulation. It sounded like love. Margaret nodded. She had no close family, aside from Alana. And Alana was doing just fine on her own. If something were to happen, she wanted Damien to be protected. Still, she didn't make any major moves right away. There was still a part of her that wanted to wait. Damien sensed that, and he knew exactly what to do. He deepened the emotional bond. He began to position himself not just as a partner, but as her protector. He told her stories of being left behind, of never being truly loved, of how Margaret was the first person who made him feel safe, that he didn't care about her money, her house, or her status. He just wanted her. She cried the night he said that, and the next day, she added his name to her life insurance policy. A few weeks later, she updated her will. The final piece came when he began managing her medications. Margaret trusted him. He knew how to sound like he cared. "These heart pills are tricky," he'd say. "Let me help you organize them better. We'll make sure you never miss a dose." She smiled, grateful. He smiled back, already thinking about what her funeral might look like. But what Damien didn't know, what he could never have predicted, was that Margaret's daughter, Detective Alana Wallace, wasn't just suspicious. She was watching, quietly, carefully, and she was waiting for him to slip. Detective Alana Wallace had always trusted her gut. It's what made her good at her job in Atlanta's homicide division. Over the years, that gut feeling had helped her crack everything from domestic murders to cold cases others had given up on. So when she shook Damien Carter's hand for the first time at her mother's house, something inside her tightened. It was subtle, a pause just a second too long, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was polished, polite, well-spoken, but Alana saw the performance. And she'd seen it before. She didn't say anything that day. She didn't want to upset her mother. Margaret was beaming, probably the happiest she'd looked in years. The house smelled like fresh flowers. Jazz music played softly in the background, and Damien moved around the kitchen like he belonged there. But he didn't. Not to Alana. The way he was always present, always just close enough to hear every conversation, rubbed her the wrong way. His answers to personal questions were vague, too vague. When she asked about his family, he said they'd all passed away. When she asked what brought him to Savannah, he offered a story about starting over, then quickly changed the subject. Alana didn't push. Not yet. Instead, she listened. She watched. She observed the small things. How Damien steered the conversation back to himself whenever her mother praised Alana's work. How he gently but firmly dismissed any talk of prenuptial agreements. How he managed to slip in casual comments like, "You don't need to worry about all that legal stuff, babe. You're retired. Enjoy life." To most people, it would have sounded romantic, supportive, comforting. To Alana, it sounded like control. Still, she kept quiet. After all, Margaret was a grown woman, a sharp woman. She'd been managing multi-million-dollar portfolios since before Damien was even born. Surely, she could see through a man like that. But Margaret wasn't seeing through anything. She was seeing love. And love, real or imagined, can blind the smartest among us. Over the following weeks, Alana visited more often, sometimes unannounced. Each time, she noticed small shifts. Her mother looked a little more tired. Damien seemed a little more possessive. The medication cabinet was suddenly rearranged. Her mother's once meticulously organized pill planner was gone, replaced by Damien's simplified system. When Alana asked about it, Margaret just laughed and waved her off. "Oh, honey, he's been a blessing. You worry too much." But that's the thing about detectives. We're supposed to worry. Margaret had started changing things in her life. Quietly, legally, and dangerously. She updated her power of attorney, naming Damien. She revised her will. She added him as a beneficiary on her life insurance policy. It was all too fast, too convenient. Alana asked her mother if she was sure. Margaret smiled and said yes. "I've never felt so cared for." That night, Alana drove back to Atlanta in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She did what she always did when the truth was hiding in plain sight. She started digging. She ran a background check on Damien Carter. The file that came back was clean. Too clean. No priors. No credit history before the age of 25. A brand new Georgia driver's license issued just 2 years ago. That's when she knew. He wasn't new to Savannah. He was new to that name. And suddenly, all the unease, the nagging doubts, the off-putting charm, the rushed romance, crystallized into one terrifying realization. Her mother wasn't just falling for the wrong man. She was falling into a trap. The wedding was small, just the way Damien Carter had planned it. A quiet chapel on the edge of Savannah, surrounded by moss-covered oaks and the soft hum of summer cicadas. No grand announcements. No guest list beyond a handful of Margaret's longtime acquaintances. Damien said he wanted intimacy, something that felt pure. Margaret believed him. She wore a pale blue dress, simple and elegant. Her smile in the photos wasn't one of giddy excitement. It was the soft, reserved smile of a woman who had given up on love, only to be surprised by it in her 60s. Damien stood beside her, calm and steady. He held her hand gently, looked her in the eye, and promised to be there through sickness and health, through every sunrise left. It was poetry. It was also rehearsed. Alana Wallace, Margaret's daughter, sat in the third pew, her hands balled into fists in her lap. She hadn't objected. She hadn't stood up and stopped the ceremony. But everything inside her screamed that this was wrong. She wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up, grab her mother's hand, and pull her out of that chapel before it was too late. But she couldn't. Because what do you do when someone you love walks straight into a fire and smiles as she burns? Alana had handled brutal murder cases, child homicides, even serial offenders. She'd been trained to compartmentalize emotion, to operate in chaos with clinical precision. But nothing in her career had prepared her for this moment. Watching her mother, her hero, make the biggest mistake of her life while wearing pearls and hope. The night before the wedding, Alana had sat in her hotel room, staring at her badge. She thought about using it, flashing it, demanding Damien run a background check, threatening legal action. But her badge couldn't protect her mother from heartbreak, and it couldn't override consent. She poured herself a glass of wine that night and reread an old letter Margaret had sent her during her academy graduation. In it, her mother had written, "You were born with fire in your chest, Alana. Never let the world blow it out, even if one day that fire burns me." Alana didn't know what Margaret had meant back then. Now she did. This wasn't just a bad relationship. This was a slow-motion collision, and she was in the passenger seat, helpless, angry, and bracing for impact. Part of her wanted to believe maybe she was wrong. Maybe this wasn't what it looked like. Maybe her mother had found joy again, and Damien was just awkward, not sinister. But Alana hadn't made detective on hope. She made it by listening to the part of her gut that others ignored. And today, that instinct was screaming. So she sat in the third pew and stayed silent. Not because she accepted the marriage, but because she was already preparing for the investigation. She wouldn't let love blind her the way it had blinded Margaret. Not again. When her mother had told her about the wedding just a week earlier, Alana had tried, carefully, to change her mind. "Are you sure, Mom? You've only known him 3 months. What's the rush?" Margaret had simply smiled and said, sweetheart. Sometimes when you know, you just know. Alana had heard those words before, usually from victims. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes. The dinner after? Less than an hour. Damien insisted they skip the honeymoon, saying he wanted to just relax at home and enjoy each other. That night, they returned to Margaret's two-story Victorian house on Whitaker Street. Alana went back to Atlanta in silence. 2 days later, her phone rang at 7:03 p.m. It was Damien. His voice cracked on the other end. Alana, your mom, she collapsed. I think she had a heart attack. The paramedics are on their way. Oh God, I don't know what to do. Please get here. Alana didn't speak. She didn't even breathe for a few seconds. Her training kicked in. Stay calm. Think. Move. She was out the door within 2 minutes. By the time she arrived at Memorial Health University Medical Center, her mother was already gone. Declared dead at 7:41 p.m. The cause? Cardiac arrest. Damien was sitting in the waiting room, hunched over, face buried in his hands. When Alana entered, he looked up with red eyes and a trembling voice. She was laughing 1 second, and then she clutched her chest and, God, I didn't know what to do. I tried everything. He stood and reached for Alana, but she didn't move. She looked at him, cold and still, and asked, where was her medication? Damien blinked. In the kitchen. Same place. I gave it to her this morning. Alana's stomach turned. Margaret had never taken her meds in the kitchen. She kept them in her bedroom, on her nightstand, in a locked case with a key only she and her doctor had. Alana said nothing more. She sat down in a chair across from Damien and stared at the floor. She didn't cry, because she couldn't. Not yet. Because she knew. This wasn't a heart attack. This was a hit. And the killer was sitting right across from her, pretending to mourn. Meanwhile, the hospital released the body within 24 hours. Damien moved quickly, too quickly. He signed the cremation forms, declined an autopsy, and arranged for a private service with no extended family present. He told everyone that Margaret wouldn't have wanted a fuss. But Alana knew better. She filed for a toxicology report behind his back, pulling every string she had as a detective. She didn't tell anyone, not even her captain. She just waited. While Damien planned the funeral, Alana built the case. She called her mother's financial advisor and learned that, just 3 weeks earlier, Margaret had revised her will to leave 100% of her assets to Damien Carter. Not a trust, not a joint account, not a family foundation. Everything. Alana hung up the phone and stared out the window of her apartment in Atlanta. The city lights blurred into smudges. She whispered to herself, "You killed her." And for the first time in her life, her grief turned to something else. War. For most people, grief is heavy. It slows them down. Foggy minds. Sleepless nights. Days that blur into one another. But for Detective Alana Wallace, grief sharpened her like a blade. The morning after her mother's cremation, she sat alone in her Atlanta apartment, a black notebook open in front of her. On the first page, she wrote 4 words in block letters. He's done this before. She didn't have evidence yet, but her instincts were screaming. Margaret Wallace wasn't the first. She was just the latest. Alana started where any good investigator would. She pulled Damien Carter's name through every available database. DMV records, marriage licenses, death certificates, property transfers. Nothing popped. Damien Carter had only existed for 2 years. Too clean. So she moved deeper, accessing restricted databases reserved for law enforcement. She widened the search, scanning for patterns. Women over 55, sudden deaths, recent marriages, large inheritances, all within a 3-year window across the southeastern U.S. And then, on a cold Thursday night, with nothing but black coffee and silence around her, she found her first hit. Charlotte Benson, 62, Charleston, South Carolina, married a man named Darius Collins. Died 3 weeks later of a heart attack. Cremated. Estate transferred. Entire sum, $1.2 million. Alana stared at the photo of Darius. It was Damien. Same face. Same smile. He just changed the name. And Charlotte wasn't alone. Alana kept digging. Next was Joyce Miller, 58, in Birmingham, Alabama. Married, to Jamal Reed. Died after falling down the stairs. Life insurance paid out $800,000. No children. No heirs. Cremated. Then came Lorraine Sutton, 66, in Macon, Georgia. Married a David Lane. Died from an undiagnosed blood clot just 1 month into the marriage. Same pattern. Different name. Same man. 3 women. 3 cities. 3 quick marriages. All widowed. All cremated. And now, her mother, Margaret Wallace, was the 4th. But she wasn't alone in her rage. 2 days into her independent investigation, Alana received a message from a blocked number. It was short, cryptic, but impossible to ignore. Charlotte Benson. Charleston. I've been waiting for someone to look deeper. Attached was a name. Janelle Benson, Charlotte's niece and only surviving family member. Alana called immediately. Janelle picked up on the first ring. Her voice was sharp. No small talk. I saw your press notice about the insurance freeze. I know what he did. I just didn't know his new name. Charlotte Benson had died 3 years ago under eerily similar circumstances. Quick marriage, sudden heart failure, rapid cremation, no autopsy. Janelle had raised concerns to local police back then, but with no hard evidence. And with Charlotte's age and pre-existing conditions, it had gone nowhere. He called himself Darius Collins back then, Janelle said. Same smile, same smooth voice, same peppermint tea every night. He said it helped with digestion. Alana froze. Margaret used to drink peppermint tea too. Damien had started making it for her each evening. He even kept a tin of it in her kitchen drawer. Janelle continued. I found his handwriting once. Pages and pages of letters he wrote to her. They all sounded like something out of a greeting card. Too perfect, like he'd rehearsed every word. Alana asked if Janelle still had any of the letters. She did. They met the next day in Atlanta. Janelle brought a small box filled with papers, photos, even an old wedding invitation. Alana compared the letters to the note Damien had left on Margaret's nightstand the morning of her death. You make the silence in this house feel like music. Same loops on the Y's. Same slant on the M's. Same man. Different name. Same predator. Janelle placed her hand on Alana's arm before leaving. Get him, Detective Wallace. For your mom. For mine. Alana nodded. The case was no longer just hers. Alana pushed back from her desk, her jaw tight. Her chest burned, not from sadness, but from rage. He was a serial predator, but not the kind that left bruises or broken windows. He left no fingerprints, no murder weapons, no witnesses. Just ashes. He was a ghost in the system, hiding behind forged documents and charming smiles. A man who moved city to city, creating new identities, marrying wealthy women, and turning their affection into inheritance. But before he became a ghost, he was a boy. And boys don't start out evil, they learn it. Marcus Delaney was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to a woman who never stayed in one place and never remembered his birthday. By the age of 5, he had already lived in 6 different foster homes. Some were decent. Most weren't. There was always a new rule, a new bed, a new man yelling in the next room. And eventually, Marcus stopped unpacking. By 12, he learned that people only care when you give them something. He stole candy bars and traded them for attention. He lied about his bruises to keep from getting kicked out again. By 15, he could charm his way out of almost anything: detention, curfew violations, even shoplifting. The counselors called him articulate. The other boys called him a snake. But it wasn't until he turned 19 that Marcus discovered something far more powerful than manipulation: vulnerability. He had been staying with a retired librarian named Ms. Ruth in Mobile, Alabama, one of the few women who ever showed him genuine kindness. She made him tea in the mornings, told him stories about her late husband, and let him borrow her car to get to job interviews. For the first time, Marcus felt wanted, cared for, and that terrified him because he didn't trust it. So one day, he opened her medicine cabinet and started counting her pills, just out of curiosity. But curiosity turned into calculation. He never went through with it. Ruth discovered the open bottles before anything happened, and instead of calling the police, she cried. She told him he didn't have to be like this, that he could be more than what the world made him. He left the next day. But the seed had been planted. He realized then, love could be a tool, and trust, the easiest door to pick. The next time he found a woman like Ruth, he didn't hesitate. He used every lesson she'd taught him, not to heal, but to harm. Her warmth had shown him the path. He just chose to walk the other way. By his mid-20s, Marcus was no longer that boy. He was a man with a method, a man who could fake pain better than most people could feel it. And every woman he met became either a target or a rehearsal for the next. And every single time, he disappeared before anyone asked questions. Until now, Alana printed every marriage certificate, every death record, and every financial transfer. She mapped out his timeline, every city, every name, every accidental death. It was all too neat. But neatness, in criminal investigation, is a red flag. Real life is messy. Real people leave trails. And Damian Carter, or Marcus Delaney, or whatever name he was using, had left one too many perfect endings. Now, she just needed the final puzzle piece. She filed a motion for her mother's toxicology report. It came back 2 days later, and it hit her like a train. Margaret Wallace had died from acute digitalis poisoning, a powerful heart medication, hers. But the dosage found in her blood was over 5 times the prescribed amount, enough to kill her instantly. There was no way her mother had made that mistake. No way Margaret, with her color-coded pill containers, her handwritten dosage charts, her routine phone calls with her cardiologist, had just mixed it up. Someone had changed the pills. Someone had switched them. And only one person had access to that drawer in the kitchen. Damian. Alana's chest ached as she stared at the report. The tears came this time, hot silent. Not from heartbreak, but from the helplessness of knowing she couldn't warn her mother. She hadn't gotten there fast enough. But it wasn't too late to stop him. She took her evidence, everything, to her captain. It didn't take long for a multi-state task force to form. The DA in Savannah reopened the Wallace case. South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, each state quietly pulled old files, reclassified them as suspicious deaths, and placed Damian Carter, aka Marcus Delaney, under official surveillance. Because even though Margaret was gone, there was one more thing Alana knew with certainty. He wasn't finished. Men like him never stop until someone makes them. And she would. Damian Carter thought he had gotten away with it again. The house was quiet now. Margaret was gone. The death certificate had been signed. The cremation complete. The will executed. He had access to everything. Her accounts, her estate, even her house, fully deeded over just 3 days before the wedding. He moved through the property like a man who had finally made it, sipping coffee in her favorite armchair, walking barefoot across hardwood floors she'd once polished every Sunday morning. And yet, something gnawed at him. He could feel it in the way the neighbors looked at him, friendly but reserved. He could feel it in the way Alana hadn't said a word to him since the memorial. She hadn't yelled, hadn't cried. She had just looked at him. That look stayed with him. Then came a knock at the door. Not the police. Not yet. Just a process server, delivering a formal notification that Margaret's life insurance payout was being temporarily frozen, pending a criminal inquiry. Damian's hands trembled as he signed for the envelope. It was happening. Someone was pulling threads, and he had a pretty good idea who it was. He went into crisis mode. He called his bank, began transferring funds into smaller, untraceable accounts. He pulled out cash, just under reporting limits, small enough not to trigger alarms, but large enough to fund an escape. He deleted emails, cleared browsing history, smashed his burner phone. He packed a suitcase, passport, fake ID, a bus ticket to Jacksonville, where he had a storage unit under a different name and a brand new identity waiting. But what he didn't know was that Alana Wallace had already called it. She had predicted his pattern to the task force, told them the moment the pressure started, he'd run, told them how he'd likely head south, not north, told them how he always left on foot or bus, never by car, and always with fake documents in a messenger bag, not suitcase. By the time Damian walked out the front door at 11:46 p.m., Savannah PD and 2 federal agents were already tailing him. But things almost fell apart. Damian didn't walk blindly into the night like they hoped. He was sharper than that, paranoid, calculated. He changed his pace twice on the sidewalk. took a sharp left on a dimly lit side street instead of heading directly for the terminal, paused at a corner store and stared at his reflection in the glass door for nearly 30 seconds, as if waiting for it to blink. The lead agent, Special Agent Ramirez, almost called the takedown right there. But Alana had briefed them too well. He tests his escape route. If he senses a tail, he aborts. Don't flinch. So they didn't. Ramirez kept walking. The backup officer on foot looped through an alley, staying parallel. The unmarked car shut off its headlights and drifted 2 blocks back. Then, the moment of tension. Damien ducked behind a dumpster and pulled out a compact mirror from his coat pocket. He held it just right, angled over his shoulder, and scanned the street behind him. For 10 terrifying seconds, he stood frozen. Ramirez held his breath. One wrong twitch and the chase would begin, with no guarantee they'd catch him before he hit the interstate or disappeared into the riverfront. But then Damien put the mirror away. He bought a water bottle from the corner store, nodded at the cashier, and continued toward the terminal. Ramirez whispered into his mic. He's still on script. Proceed. When Damien reached the ticket counter, the clerk, already prepped by federal agents, smiled politely and stalled him by asking extra ID questions. That gave the surveillance team just enough time to confirm his bag and get everyone in position. It had been close. Too close. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, Damien Carter sat in the back of the terminal, hood up, bag by his feet, convinced he had outsmarted everyone once again. He didn't know the trap had already snapped shut. They let him get to the bus terminal, let him buy the ticket, let him sit in the back corner with his hood up, glancing at the security cameras every few seconds. And when the bus began boarding, that's when they moved in. Marcus Delaney, also known as Damien Carter. You're under arrest for the murder of Margaret Wallace. He didn't resist. Not at first. But when they cuffed his wrists and took his bag, the mask cracked. Not the charming, grieving widower anymore. Just a cold, flat-eyed man who had been running for too long. Back in Atlanta, Alana sat in her car when the call came in. We've got him. She didn't speak. She just exhaled. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel something close to peace. But it wasn't over. Now came the trial. The trial of the century, in silence. The courtroom was full the first day. Local news stations lined the back row. True crime reporters whispered from the gallery. Former families of the deceased women came from across state lines, some holding faded photos, others clutching tear-stained statements. Damien Carter, dressed in a gray suit provided by the state, sat with a posture so perfect it was almost unnatural. Calm, quiet, detached. He pled not guilty. His defense? That Margaret had died of natural causes. That the medication mix-up was an accident. That the other deaths had no connection to him. That he simply had bad luck in love. The prosecution destroyed him. They brought up the toxicology report, digitalis poisoning in fatal concentration. They presented handwriting experts who confirmed the changes on insurance documents weren't made by Margaret. They showed marriage licenses across 4 states, all featuring Damien under different names. They brought in family members of the other women, daughters, nieces, old friends, who testified about whirlwind romances, suspicious deaths, cremations rushed in less than 72 hours. And they brought one final piece of evidence. A notebook from his Jacksonville storage unit, buried in a fireproof box, detailing aliases, timelines, and even handwritten scripts for how to charm specific types of women. It wasn't just premeditated. It was a lifestyle. In closing arguments, the prosecutor didn't yell. He didn't need to. He simply said, this man made a career out of turning love into a weapon. And Margaret Wallace was just his next paycheck, until her daughter stopped him. Damien never looked at Alana during the entire trial, but she stared at him every single day. The jury didn't deliberate long. Just under 3 hours after closing arguments, they returned to the courtroom. Faces tight, eyes focused. No one looked at the defendant. Alana Wallace sat still. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. The foreperson stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Damien Carter, also known as Marcus Delaney, guilty of murder in the first degree. Guilty. The word echoed in the chamber like thunder. For a split second, Damien didn't move. Then his jaw tensed. But still, no emotion, no tears, no outburst, just silence. For a man who had orchestrated every detail of every death, he was now staring at something he couldn't charm his way out of: consequences. The judge's voice was firm as granite. You have shown a pattern of cruelty, deception, and premeditation. You exploited love, trust, and loneliness to build your own fortune from the ashes of women you claimed to care for. In that moment, when the courtroom held its breath and every eye fixed on him, something shifted in Damien. Not fear, not guilt, something colder, something closer to disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. For years, he had slipped through cracks, rewritten his identity, worn masks with perfect symmetry. His charm had opened bank accounts, back doors, and bedroom windows. No one ever saw the man beneath the suit. No one ever got close enough to cut through the smile. Until Alana Wallace. As the judge spoke, Damien's mind raced, not with regret, but with calculation. Could he appeal? Could he fake mental illness? Could he flip it somehow? Spin the narrative, charm the jury on a retrial? But the facts were too tight, the evidence too clear, the victims too many, and that girl, Alana, had gutted him without laying a single finger. He turned slightly in his chair, just enough to glimpse her at the prosecution table. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even blinking. She was staring straight through him, past the act, past the lies. For the first time in his life, Damien Carter felt exposed and utterly small. He faced the judge again, jaw locked. He would not beg. He would not cry. But for the first time, he understood what it meant to be truly seen and truly finished. Then came the sentence: life in prison, without the possibility of parole. He would never walk free again. Alana felt her chest rise with breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for months. Not victory, not even relief, but something closer to peace. At the press conference, later that afternoon, cameras flashed as Alana stepped up to the podium outside the courthouse. She hadn't planned to speak, but her mother's photo sat beside her on an easel, smiling in the sun. So she did. My mother, Margaret Wallace, was a brilliant, kind, and fiercely independent woman. She deserved better than to become a headline in a true crime story. She paused. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't naive. She was human. And like so many others, she wanted to be loved. That's not a weakness. It's what makes us alive. The crowd was silent. She continued. Predators like Damien Carter don't come in the form of monsters. They come in suits, with polite smiles. And they don't break in through windows. They're invited in through loneliness. She looked straight into the cameras. So if you're watching this and you have someone in your life, an older parent, a widow, a friend, check on them. Ask questions. Look closer. Because the people who do this count on your silence. Then softly, she added, I didn't save my mother, but I made sure she wasn't the last. 6 months later, Damien sat alone in a maximum security federal prison in Mississippi. He didn't talk much. No more aliases. No more charming smiles. Just a number. And a life sentence. He received no visitors. No letters. No inheritance. Just silence. But in Savannah, Georgia, something had changed. Alana took time off from active duty to work with a nonprofit foundation named after her mother, the Margaret Initiative. Its mission? To protect elderly women from financial exploitation, romance scams, and emotional manipulation. They gave workshops in retirement communities, trained bank tellers to recognize red flags, and helped adult children know what to watch for. Her mother's legacy was no longer tragedy. It was prevention. A quiet afternoon in Savannah. One Sunday, Alana visited her mother's old house. The flowers Margaret had planted years ago were still blooming. Camellias, white, her favorite. She sat on the porch, holding the mug her mother used to drink tea from. The same mug Damien once pretended to fill with love. The same mug her mother clutched that last morning. She held it gently now, not as a reminder of how Margaret died, but how she lived, with dignity, with strength, with hope. And despite everything that had happened, Alana chose to remember the woman who danced to Billie Holiday in her kitchen, who wrote holiday cards by hand, and who still believed, after everything, that love was worth hoping for. Final message to the viewers. Margaret Wallace was 60 years old when she took a chance on love. And though that chance cost her everything, her story helped save others. This case wasn't just about murder. It was about how manipulation hides in plain sight, behind smiles, good manners, and promises of forever. If something feels off, even just a little, listen to that voice. Because sometimes it's the only thing standing between justice and another silent funeral. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and don't forget to check in on the ones who think they don't need checking in on. The end.